Some people will begin to feel uneasy around you without being able to explain why. Nothing happened. No argument, no confrontation, no dramatic moment. Yet suddenly the energy shifts. Conversations shorten. Smiles feel forced. Invitations slow down. Messages stop coming. You notice it first in subtle ways. A friend who used to talk for hours now keeps things surface level. A family member who once felt warm now feels distant. A co-worker avoids eye contact. A room that once felt familiar now feels heavy. And the most confusing part is this: you didn't change your personality in any obvious way. You didn't become louder. You didn't become cruel. You didn't become aggressive. If anything, you became quieter, calmer, more grounded. So why does your presence suddenly make people uncomfortable? Carl Jung observed something that very few people talk about. He recognized that certain individuals carry a psychic frequency that directly activates the unconscious material in others. Not through words, not through behavior, but simply through presence. These individuals become living mirrors. They do not reflect what people want to see. They reflect what people have buried, and that is why they are avoided. If you have been feeling increasingly out of place in spaces where you once belonged, it is not because you are broken. It is not because you are defective. It is not because you lost your value. It is because you are changing at a structural level. You are no longer operating from the same psychological architecture. And that shift is not neutral. It creates friction, because when one person evolves, everyone around them is silently invited to evolve too. Most people do not want that invitation, not consciously, but at a deep level, because growth demands confrontation, and confrontation demands responsibility. Jung called this process individuation. The moment a person stops living primarily through collective expectations and begins living from the inner self, not the persona, not the social mask, not the adapted version, but the core. This process is not glamorous. It is not peaceful in the way social media portrays healing. It is disorienting. It is lonely. It dismantles illusions. And one of the first consequences is energetic separation. Not because you reject others, but because your nervous system no longer resonates with unconscious patterns. You start to feel allergic to superficiality. You start to feel physically uncomfortable in environments built on pretense. You start to sense when people are lying to themselves, not as a judgment, but as an awareness. And awareness has weight. When you walk into a room carrying self-awareness, unresolved parts inside others start to stir. Their suppressed anger feels exposed. Their avoided grief feels close to the surface. Their unacknowledged emptiness becomes louder, not because you did anything, but because you are no longer numbing yourself. Your regulation becomes a contrast. Your presence becomes a spotlight. Not an intentional one, but an unavoidable one. This is why people say things like, "I don't know why, but I feel weird around you lately. You've changed. You're too intense. You're different." They are not describing your behavior. They are describing their internal reaction to your evolution. You are no longer confirming their unconscious contracts. You are no longer participating in the collective denial. You are no longer agreeing energetically to pretend that everything is fine. That alone is enough to make many people uncomfortable, because most relationships are built on unspoken agreements. We will not look too deeply. We will not question too much. We will not disrupt the emotional status quo. When one person breaks that agreement simply by becoming more conscious, the entire structure destabilizes. You didn't break anything. You outgrew something. There is a profound difference. Jung described psychic energy as something that naturally reorganizes itself toward wholeness. Not toward happiness, not toward comfort, toward wholeness. Wholeness includes light and shadow. It includes strength and fear. It includes clarity and grief. Most people spend their lives avoiding wholeness. They choose comfort. They choose distraction. They choose familiarity. You did not. Even if you didn't consciously decide it, your soul did. At some point, something inside you refused to keep numbing, refused to keep shrinking, refused to keep pretending. You began asking different questions, not how do I fit in, but who am I when I stop performing? Not how do I become more likable, but why do I feel disconnected from myself? Not how do I keep everyone comfortable, but why am I uncomfortable living this way? These questions are dangerous to collective systems, because systems rely on predictability, and a woman who starts listening to herself becomes unpredictable. Not chaotic, not reckless, but internally sovereign. Sovereignty is threatening, because sovereign people cannot be easily controlled through shame. They cannot be easily manipulated through approval. They cannot be easily motivated by fear of exclusion. They no longer trade authenticity for belonging. That alone changes everything. You may notice that people who once leaned on you emotionally begin to pull away. Not because you became cold, but because you stopped overextending. You stopped absorbing what was never yours to carry. You stopped being the emotional landfill for other people's unresolved pain. That feels like abandonment to those who benefited from your self-abandonment. You may notice that people who loved your softness now say you are hard. What they mean is, you have boundaries. You may notice that people who liked you when you were unsure now feel threatened. What changed is not your kindness. What changed is your self-trust. Self-trust radiates a frequency that disrupts dysfunctional dynamics. Because dysfunctional dynamics depend on self-doubt. They depend on confusion. They depend on people being unsure of their worth. You are becoming sure. Not arrogant, not superior. Sure. Sure of what you tolerate. Sure of what you don't. Sure of when something feels wrong. Sure of when something feels empty. This certainty makes it impossible to participate in certain games. And when you stop playing, players become uncomfortable. They may not know why. They may never articulate it. But they feel it. Your presence says without words, I am not abandoning myself anymore. That sentence alone can shatter illusions. Another subtle sign that this process has begun is that you no longer feel compelled to explain yourself constantly. You notice the impulse to justify, but you don't follow it. You feel the old urge to over-communicate. But you pause. You begin to understand that your life does not require permission slips. You do not need universal understanding in order to exist. This is not rebellion. This is maturation. Children seek approval to feel safe. Adults build internal safety. You are building internal safety, and that shifts your entire energetic posture. You stand differently. You speak differently. You move differently. Even if you don't notice it consciously, others do. You are no longer energetically available for dynamics rooted in guilt, obligation, and emotional extraction. That closes doors, not because you slammed them, but because you stopped holding them open. And this is where many women begin to doubt themselves. They think, am I becoming too isolated? Am I doing something wrong? Why does it feel like I'm losing people? What you are actually losing are identities, roles, attachments, contracts that were never aligned with your true nature. You are shedding skins, not people. Some people cannot remain in your life if they refuse to meet the version of you that is emerging. Not because either of you are bad, but because frequency matters. Depth requires depth. Consciousness requires consciousness. You cannot build intimacy across radically different levels of self-awareness. Not sustainably. Jung understood that individuation naturally creates separation before it creates true connection. First comes solitude, then comes discernment, then comes resonance. Most people try to skip the solitude. They cling, they attach, they fill silence with noise. You did not. You stayed, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it hurt, even when you didn't understand what was happening. That alone tells a story about you. It says, you are not afraid of your inner world. You are willing to meet yourself. You are willing to feel. You are willing to look. That is rare, and rarity always creates distance from the common. Not because it is better, but because it is different. If people are pulling away from you right now, it does not automatically mean something is wrong. It may mean something is very right. It may mean you are crossing a psychological threshold. It may mean you are no longer available for shallow bonds. It may mean you are becoming a woman who belongs to herself. That path is quiet. It is uncelebrated. It is not rewarded by the crowd, but it leads somewhere real. You are not cursed. You are not defective. You are not broken. You are becoming integrated, and integration changes everything. Not all at once, not dramatically, but permanently. Your presence is shifting. Your nervous system is recalibrating. Your tolerance for unconsciousness is lowering. That is not a flaw. That is evolution. And evolution is never comfortable, but it is always honest. If you recognize yourself in this, understand this, you are not alone in the way it feels, but you are alone in the way pioneers are alone. Not abandoned, not doomed, but early. And early always feels lonely, before it feels free. There is a deep agreement that happens inside you long before your mind can explain it. Jung spoke of the collective, unconscious as a vast reservoir of shared patterns and archetypes, a psychic ocean that all human beings swim in. But he also spoke of another movement that is far less discussed, the painful necessity for certain individuals to separate from that ocean in order to discover their own consciousness. This separation is not glamorous. It is not celebrated. It does not look like enlightenment. It feels like loss. It feels like not fitting. It feels like standing on the edge of rooms where you once belonged and realizing you no longer recognize the language being spoken inside. Humans are wired for belonging. We are social by nature. Connection is a biological need. So when a soul begins to withdraw from collective patterns, every instinct inside the body protests. Yet some souls are not meant to stay embedded in the collective for their entire lives. Not because they are superior, not because they are special in a hierarchical sense, but because their role is different. Women who carry this first sign within them intuitively sense that not every connection is meant to be maintained. Not every conversation deserves their energy. Not every person has earned access to their inner world. They feel this not as arrogance, but as an almost instinctual knowing. Something inside them whispers, "My inner world is sacred. My energy is finite. My depth requires protection." So they begin, quietly, to curate their lives. They do not announce it. They do not write manifestos about it. They simply stop showing up where they feel empty. They stop forcing themselves to stay in conversations that drain them. They stop maintaining bonds that only exist through obligation. They stop explaining why certain spaces no longer feel right. This is not coldness. This is discernment. And discernment is one of the earliest expressions of individuation. The second rare sign reveals itself through your relationship with silence. Not the silence that comes from fear, not the silence that comes from suppression, but the silence that arises from inner fullness. Jung described the integrated self as a state of inner coherence, where a person no longer requires constant external validation to feel real. In this state, identity is not constructed through performance but through presence. Women who have reached this stage speak differently. Often, they speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because they no longer feel compelled to fill space. They do not narrate their lives. They do not justify their choices. They do not constantly clarify who they are. They simply exist. And this kind of existence unsettles people. Why? Because most of the world operates through noise. People talk to avoid feeling. They explain to avoid being questioned. They perform to avoid confronting their own emptiness. So when you sit in your own presence without scrambling to prove yourself, something uncomfortable happens in others. Your silence becomes a mirror. It reflects their inner chaos. It reflects their unresolved wounds. It reflects the parts of themselves they have been running from. From a Jungian perspective, this is projection. People do not react to you. They react to what you awaken inside them. When you stop reacting, stop defending, stop over-explaining, stop playing along, it removes their favorite coping mechanism. They can no longer place their discomfort onto you, and that makes them uneasy. So they label you distant, cold, intimidating, arrogant, not because you are those things, but because your quiet presence exposes how much noise they need to survive. You may notice that you no longer participate in certain social games. The constant comparison, the subtle competition between women, who is more successful, who is more attractive, who is more spiritual, who is more desirable, not because you believe you are above anyone, but because these dynamics feel empty. They do not feed your soul. They feel like rituals designed to keep people distracted from themselves, and your nervous system knows this. Before your mind can articulate it, your body responds. You enter certain spaces and immediately feel tight. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your shoulders tense. Your stomach contracts. Your energy pulls inward. This is not anxiety in the pathological sense. This is somatic intelligence. It is your body recognizing misalignment. Individuation does not happen only in the mind. It happens in the body. You become a whole organism. Again, your instincts sharpen. Your sensitivity deepens. Your tolerance for inauthenticity collapses. You no longer override your body's signals to be polite. You no longer betray your inner knowing to avoid awkwardness. You leave rooms without making dramatic exits. You decline invitations without providing elaborate reasons. You choose yourself quietly. This is not arrogance. This is self-respect. The third rare sign is even more uncomfortable. You begin to feel like you no longer belong to your old identity, not in a dramatic egoic way, but in a subtle, disorienting way. You look at your past self and feel compassion, but you do not feel attachment. You see the woman you were and recognize how much she endured, how much she tried, how much she adapted, how much she silenced. But you also know you cannot return to her. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unknow what you now know. This creates a strange in-between state. You are no longer who you were, but you are not fully who you are becoming. Jung described this as a liminal phase of transformation, where the old ego structure dissolves before the new one stabilizes. It feels like standing in fog. You sense that something fundamental has shifted, but you cannot yet articulate what you are turning into. This can feel lonely, because very few people around you will understand this phase. They may try to pull you back into familiar roles. They may say you've changed. They may imply that you are becoming difficult. What they are really sensing is that they no longer have access to the version of you they could predict. You are becoming internally anchored. Your sense of self is no longer negotiated. It is generated, and this changes how people relate to you. Some will drift away, not because of conflict, but because resonance has ended. Others may become strangely hostile, not openly, but through passive distance, through subtle exclusion, through quiet withdrawal. Again, this is not about you. It is about the mirror you now carry. You remind people of the parts of themselves they abandoned. And that is painful. You may also notice something else. You feel less interested in being liked, not in a bitter way, not in a detached way, but in a neutral way. You still care. You still have empathy. But you no longer organize your life around other people's approval. Your compass has turned inward. You are no longer asking, do they accept me? You are asking, do I accept myself here? That single shift changes everything. This is what Jung meant by moving from ego to self, from externally defined identity to internally rooted being. It is not loud. It is not flashy. It is not aesthetic. It is deeply quiet and deeply destabilizing. Because once this process begins, it does not reverse. You cannot unknow your soul. You cannot pretend to be smaller again. You cannot comfortably live inside roles that were built for survival instead of truth. This does not mean you are destined to be alone forever. It means your standards for connection have evolved. You are no longer seeking quantity. You are seeking resonance. You are no longer seeking proximity. You are seeking depth. You are no longer seeking validation. You are seeking recognition, not from everyone, from the few who can actually see you. These people exist. They are rare, and they often appear later in life, because they too had to walk through their own fires. Until then, solitude becomes your teacher, not as punishment, not as abandonment, but as refinement. Solitude teaches you how to be with yourself without distraction, how to sit with your thoughts without numbing, how to feel your emotions without outsourcing regulation, how to trust your inner voice, how to build a relationship with your own presence. This relationship becomes the foundation for everything else. You are no longer searching for someone to complete you. You are becoming complete, not perfect, not finished, but whole. And wholeness carries a certain gravity. It does not chase. It does not beg. It does not perform. It simply exists. This existence is what unsettles some people and deeply comforts others. You are not broken. You are not antisocial. You are not defective. You are in the middle of individuation. You are becoming a woman who belongs to herself. And that path is narrow, quiet, often misunderstood, but profoundly real. If you recognize yourself in this, it is not an accident. It means something ancient. Inside you has started to wake up, not to make you special, but to make you whole. And wholeness has a way of rearranging everything. It is not arrogance, it is instinctual self-preservation. On a deep, cellular level, something inside you understands that your energy is too valuable to be spent on performances that have nothing to do with your truth. Your withdrawal is not hostility. It is not bitterness. It is not superiority. It is discernment. Your silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is presence without distraction. Presence without performance. Presence without needing to be witnessed. Most people fall silent because they feel defeated, unheard, or afraid. You fall silent because you finally understand that not everything real requires language. You have learned that some truths collapse when they are spoken too early, that some insights lose their power when they are over-explained, that some transformations need darkness, privacy, and time. You discovered that your greatest strength often lives in what you no longer feel compelled to say, and this unsettles people. They sense a boundary, even if you never announced one. They feel that something about you is no longer available in the way it once was. So they try to reach for it, they ask questions, they provoke reactions, they attempt to pull you back into familiar rhythms. But you remain steady, not cold, not distant, not detached, simply present. And presence without performance feels threatening in a world addicted to noise. Your quiet is not passive. It is an act of sovereignty. It says, I do not need to explain my existence. I do not need to narrate my becoming. I do not need your approval to be real. Even if you never say these words out loud, people feel them. That is why some step back. That is why some grow uneasy. Not because you are doing anything to them, but because you are no longer participating in the same unconscious agreements. You are no longer trading authenticity for belonging. You are no longer bargaining with your soul. This leads to the third rare sign, a fundamental shift in how you relate to responsibility. Not just responsibility toward others, but responsibility toward yourself. You no longer see it as your duty to rescue people from their own inner work. You no longer believe it is your job to carry other people's pain as if it were yours. You no longer confuse empathy with self-sacrifice. In Jungian psychology, the archetype of the Great Mother carries both nurturing and devouring aspects. Many women spend their lives stuck inside the distorted version of this archetype. They become the caretaker who disappears inside everyone else's needs. Or they become the eternal daughter, unconsciously waiting for someone to come and organize their life, fix their wounds, and provide safety. You have stepped out of both. You realized something quietly radical. No one can do your inner healing for you, and you cannot do anyone else's inner healing for them. You can witness, you can listen, you can care, but you do not take ownership of what does not belong to you. This is not lack of compassion. It is mature compassion. It is compassion with boundaries. It is love that does not self-erase. You also stop waiting for someone to save you, not in a hardened way, not in a bitter way, but in a grounded way. You understand that your healing, your growth, your stability, your becoming are your responsibility. No partner can complete that. No friend can substitute that. No teacher can bypass that. This realization is sobering. It strips away fantasies. It dissolves unconscious dependency. But it also gives you something priceless. Agency. Jung described the integration of the inner masculine, the animus, as the development of inner authority within a woman. When this integration occurs, a woman no longer needs an external figure to define her direction, worth, or truth. She develops her own internal compass, her own decision-making center, her own capacity to stand alone. This inner authority does not feel harsh. It does not feel rigid. It feels calm. It feels grounded. It feels quietly unshakable. And this kind of woman is deeply unsettling to systems built on control. Because she is not easily guilted. She is not easily manipulated through fear. She is not easily seduced by false promises. She is not easily shamed into compliance. She does not need permission to trust herself. She does not outsource her knowing. She listens inward first. This does not make her aggressive. It makes her sovereign. She does not dominate. She does not submit. She simply stands. This standing changes everything about how you move through the world. You no longer chase clarity from others. You no longer over-explain your choices. You no longer beg to be understood. You understand yourself, and that is enough. Not in an egoic sense, but in a settled sense. You also begin to notice something subtle. You attract different kinds of people, not more people, but different people. People who are uncomfortable with depth tend to drift away. People who live primarily in performance feel exposed around you. People who rely on chaos for stimulation feel bored by your calm. But a few rare individuals recognize you immediately, not because you advertise who you are, but because they feel it. They sense your coherence. They sense your inner alignment. They sense that you are not fragmented. These are often people who have walked through their own dark nights, people who have faced themselves, people who have lost illusions, people who value truth over comfort. Connections with these individuals do not require effortful maintenance. They do not depend on constant communication. They do not require masks. Silence is not awkward between you. Stillness is not threatening. Depth feels natural. These connections are not loud. They are quiet, stable, and real. This is the paradox of individuation. As your outer world may become smaller, your inner world becomes vast. As your social circle may shrink, your sense of self expands. As you lose superficial belonging, you gain inner home. You stop asking, where do I fit? You start living from, I belong to myself. And from that place, everything else becomes a choice. Not a necessity, not a survival strategy. A choice. You choose who you let close. You choose where you invest energy. You choose when you speak. You choose when you remain silent. This is power. Not power over others. Power over your own life. If you recognize yourself in this, it does not mean you are superior. It means you are in the middle of a very old, very demanding, very sacred process. The process of becoming whole. It does not look impressive. It does not look aesthetic. It often looks lonely. It often feels confusing. But it leads to something that cannot be faked. Inner solidity. You become someone who does not collapse when misunderstood. Someone who does not disappear when alone. Someone who does not betray herself to be accepted. Someone who can sit with her own presence and feel at home. That is not small. That is not ordinary. That is not accidental. It is the quiet emergence of a woman who belongs to herself. And once that happens, nothing can ever truly own you again. She becomes a living union of compassion and clarity, softness and strength, sensitivity and sovereignty. She can hold tenderness in her heart while holding firm boundaries in her life. She can offer love without offering access. She can feel deeply without drowning. She can care without collapsing. This is not contradiction. This is integration. You are no longer split between who you are and who you were taught to be. You are no longer torn between being acceptable and being authentic. You are no longer negotiating your existence. You are simply here, present, whole, undivided. In Jungian language, this is the sacred marriage of opposites within the psyche. The inner, feminine, and the inner masculine are no longer at war. They are no longer competing for control. They are working together. Your sensitivity now has structure. Your strength now has tenderness. Your intuition now has discernment. Your love now has boundaries. This changes everything. You begin to recognize certain dynamics immediately without needing to analyze them. Subtle manipulation disguised as affection. Emotional bargaining dressed up as concern. Dependency disguised as intimacy. You feel the energetic undertone before the words even finish forming. Your body responds before your mind does, and you no longer override that knowing. Not because you are cold, not because you are hardened, not because you have become closed, but because you have become clear. Clarity is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not justify itself. It does not argue. It simply sees. And once you see, you cannot unsee. You start choosing what is healthy even when it costs you connection. Even when it means walking away. Even when it means sitting alone on a Friday night. Even when it means disappointing people who benefited from your previous lack of boundaries. This is one of the most painful thresholds of growth. Because the part of you that once survived by pleasing others still exists. Because the part of you that once feared abandonment still whispers. Because the part of you that once equated love with endurance still remembers. But another part of you has grown stronger. The part that knows that self-betrayal is more devastating than loneliness. The part that knows that staying in what harms you slowly kills your spirit. The part that knows that real love does not require self-erasure. And so you choose differently. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Not with speeches or ultimatums. You simply stop participating. You stop explaining. You stop convincing. You stop chasing. You allow people to reveal who they are through their choices. You allow them to walk their own path. Even when you can see where that path leads. Even when you can sense the consequences before they arrive. Even when it hurts to watch. This is a form of maturity that is rarely discussed. The wisdom of non-interference. You understand on a soul level that every human being has their own curriculum, their own timing, their own lessons, their own descent and ascent. You cannot save anyone from becoming who they need to become. You cannot carry someone into their awakening. You cannot force insight into a nervous system that is not ready to hold it. Your intervention would not heal. It would interrupt. So you step back, not in abandonment, in respect. Respect for their process. Respect for your energy. Respect for the intelligence of life itself. This does not make you indifferent. It makes you aligned. It makes you trust something larger than your urge to control outcomes. And this alignment creates a new kind of solitude. Not the aching loneliness of rejection, not the emptiness of being unwanted, but the spacious solitude of standing in yourself. There is a difference. One collapses you, the other stabilizes you. However, there is a shadow side to this path that must be named, because every archetype has light and shadow. Every strength carries a potential distortion. Every awakening carries a temptation. The temptation to identify with the role of the awakened one. The temptation to see yourself as more evolved, more conscious, more developed than others. The temptation to subtly place yourself above. Jung warned about this. He warned about inflation. Inflation happens when the ego merges with an archetype. When a person does not just touch wisdom, but starts to believe they are wisdom itself. When a person does not just access insight, but starts to believe they are above ordinary humanity. This is dangerous territory, because it feels spiritual, but it is actually disconnection. You begin to look down on others while telling yourself you are simply observing. You begin to label people as unconscious while forgetting your own unconsciousness. You begin to justify distance with superiority rather than discernment. And slowly, quietly, you slip out of humility. True depth is never arrogant. True awareness always includes awareness of one's own darkness. True integration never claims purity. High consciousness does not mean you no longer feel anger. It does not mean you no longer feel envy. It does not mean you no longer feel exhausted, resentful, doubtful, or afraid. High consciousness means you stop pretending you are beyond these states. It means you can witness them without becoming them. It means you can hold them without acting them out. It means you can admit, this is here, without turning it into an identity. You remain human. You remain fallible. You remain unfinished. This is what keeps you sane. This is what keeps you grounded. This is what keeps your growth real. The woman who is truly integrated does not float above humanity. She stands inside it with open eyes. She knows she is capable of love and cruelty. She knows she is capable of wisdom and pettiness. She knows she is capable of generosity and selfishness. And she takes responsibility for all of it, not through shame, through honesty. This honesty creates an internal stability that cannot be faked. You no longer need to appear spiritual. You no longer need to appear healed. You no longer need to perform growth. You are too busy living it, quietly, imperfectly, consistently. You make mistakes. You catch yourself. You repair. You adjust. You continue. There is no finish line. There is no final identity. There is only deepening. And with this deepening comes a strange freedom. You are no longer trying to become someone else. You are no longer trying to escape yourself. You are no longer trying to transcend your humanity. You are inhabiting it. Fully. This is what gives your presence weight. Not charisma. Not confidence. Not aesthetics. But coherence. You are internally aligned enough that your words, actions, and energy point in the same direction. People feel this even if they cannot explain it. It is not something you do. It is something you are. And this is why you no longer need to convince. Why you no longer need to prove. Why you no longer need to explain. You are not trying to be understood. You are trying to be true. And truth has a gravity of its own. Those who are ready feel it. Those who are not react to it. Both responses are information. You do not chase either. You remain where you are. Inside yourself. Rooted. Aware. Human. Whole. Not perfect. Not superior. Not finished. But real. And that is the rarest form of power there is. There is also a shadow that comes with this state. And it shows up in you from time to time. You can be sharp. You can be distant. You can be emotionally reserved. And that is not a failure. That is not a flaw. That is part of being human. From the outside, some people will perceive you as cold, detached, or inaccessible. Sometimes that perception is accurate. Not because you lack feeling, but because you refuse to maintain illusions. You refuse to participate in relationships that only function on the surface. You refuse to smile through discomfort. You refuse to pretend that everything is fine when it is not. This honesty is often misunderstood. People assume hardness where there is integrity. They assume lack of heart where there is discernment. They assume arrogance where there is self-respect. What they do not see is that you are protecting your heart, not closing it. You are choosing where your emotional life is allowed to exist. You are conserving energy for what is real. You are no longer willing to bleed for connections that never intended to hold you. The journey of what many call high vibration does not end in constant peace or endless harmony. It ends in acceptance of your own contradictions. It ends in the capacity to remain with yourself even when you do not like what you see, even when you disappoint yourself, even when you fall back into old patterns, even when you feel tired, resentful, or unsure. Integration does not mean perfection. It means wholeness, and wholeness includes everything: light and shadow, clarity and confusion, strength and vulnerability, presence and withdrawal. One of the most difficult aspects of this path is that much of it happens without witnesses. No one applauds your internal victories. No one congratulates you for the beliefs you dismantled. No one sees the versions of yourself that had to die so that something truer could live. Jung described individuation as a fundamentally invisible journey. From the outside, nothing may appear to change, but inside, entire worlds collapse and reorganize. Old identities dissolve. Old loyalties break. Old survival strategies lose their power. And all of this happens quietly. There are no medals for this work. There is no external validation. There is no audience. In fact, quite often the opposite happens. Instead of admiration, you encounter discomfort. Instead of praise, you encounter distance. Instead of understanding, you encounter subtle resistance. People who are still living on autopilot often experience your presence as unsettling. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because your way of being exposes the choices they are avoiding. Your existence becomes a mirror they did not ask for. You remind them, without saying a word, that it is possible to stop performing, that it is possible to stop betraying oneself, that it is possible to choose differently. And that reminder is not welcome. So they pull away. They label you. They avoid you. They project onto you. You find yourself in an in-between space. The people who once knew you no longer recognize you. You no longer fit the role they assigned. You no longer respond to the same triggers. You no longer play your part in familiar dynamics. This confuses them. They do not know how to engage with you anymore, so they keep their distance. At the same time, you have not yet found your new mirrors. You have not yet entered a new circle where your way of being is reflected back with ease. You are between worlds. This is one of the most difficult thresholds of transformation. You do not belong to the old anymore. You have not yet arrived at the new, and the space in between is lonely. This is where the temptation to go backward becomes strongest. Here, the voices of doubt grow louder. Here the mind whispers familiar questions. Was I wrong? Did I overcorrect? Was it easier before? Should I soften myself again? Should I explain more, give more, bend more? This is not a sign that you are failing. This is the final resistance of an old identity trying to survive. Jung warned that during deep transformation, the psyche often attempts to restore equilibrium by pulling us back into familiar patterns. Not because they are healthy, but because they are known. The unknown, even when it is truer, feels threatening. Staying here requires courage, not dramatic courage, quiet courage, the courage to not rush into a new identity, the courage to not force belonging, the courage to not dilute yourself to escape loneliness. This transitional solitude has a purpose. It teaches you to stand without external mirrors. It teaches you to validate yourself internally. It teaches you to trust your own perception, even when no one else confirms it. You learn to tolerate ambiguity. You learn to live without immediate reassurance. You learn to let the next chapter arrive organically instead of chasing it out of fear. And slowly, something stabilizes inside you. You stop needing to be understood by everyone. You stop needing to be liked to feel legitimate. You stop explaining your evolution. You become grounded in your own authority. This does not mean you will never feel lonely again. It means loneliness no longer defines you. It becomes information, not identity. You can feel it without collapsing into it. You can sit with it without abandoning yourself. And from this place, something subtle begins to shift. Your presence becomes calmer. Your nervous system becomes steadier. Your reactions become fewer, but more precise. You no longer chase connection. You allow alignment. You no longer force closeness. You allow resonance. People who cannot meet you where you are naturally fall away. People who can eventually appear, not in large numbers, not dramatically, but authentically. Until then, you remain. Not frozen, not closed, not superior, just honest. You accept that you are capable of warmth and withdrawal, that you can love deeply and still say no, that you can care without rescuing, that you can be open without being exposed. This is maturity, and it is not glamorous. It is grounded. It is sober. It is real. You are no longer trying to prove that you are good. You are no longer trying to prove that you are evolved. You are no longer trying to convince anyone of who you are. You are living it, quietly. And that is why this phase feels invisible. Because it is not meant to be seen. It is meant to be integrated. The world will catch up later, or it won't. Either way, you will be standing in yourself. And that is the point. Maybe you tell yourself that everything was a mistake. Maybe you wonder if you were happier before you started seeing so clearly. Maybe you imagine that if you went back, if you adapted, again, if you played the role again, life would feel easier. But deep down, you know something has shifted permanently. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unknow what you now understand. You cannot make yourself small in the same way again. There is no true return path. Not because the past was wrong, but because you are no longer the person who lived it. So you move forward, even when you cannot yet see where you are going. You stop telling your story, not because you are ashamed, but because you are tired of translating yourself. You no longer need witnesses for your becoming. You no longer need external confirmation that what you went through was real. You know, and that knowing is enough. This release from other people's perceptions may be the deepest freedom you will ever experience. You no longer organize your life around how you are interpreted. You no longer shape yourself to fit narratives. You no longer live for the version of you that exists in someone else's mind. You live for the version of you that exists when you are alone with yourself. Your transformation does not happen with applause. It does not come with dramatic milestones. There is no single moment where everything suddenly makes sense. It arrives quietly. One day you realize you are not the woman you used to be, not in a flashy way, not in a performative way, but in a deeper, subtler way. You are simpler, more honest, less armored, more real. There is less decoration around you. Not because you lost something, but because you stopped needing excess. Your truth no longer requires embellishment. It exists in the way you breathe, in the way you walk, in the way you look at the world, in the way you pause before responding, in the way you choose yourself without announcing it. When everything unnecessary falls away, something remains. Not the ego, not the persona, not the identity you built to survive. What remains is the self, the quiet core that existed before the world told you who to be. The part of you that was there before approval, before rejection, before conditioning. You begin to notice beauty in ordinary things. Morning light through a window, the sound of your own footsteps, the feeling of clean water on your skin, the steady rhythm of your breath, the stillness of night. You return to your body, not as a problem to fix, not as an object to perfect, but as a living presence to inhabit. You are here, not floating above life, not chasing transcendence, not trying to escape the human experience. You are inside it, fully, and this is what surprises many people. They think higher consciousness looks like constant bliss. They think awakening looks like permanent serenity. They think high vibration means existing above the messiness of being human. But the highest vibration is not escape. It is embodiment. It is being fully in your life, in the texture of your days, in the weight of your hands, in the taste of your food, in the tiredness of your body, at night. In the small, quiet moments no one posts about, not because these moments are special, but because you are finally present enough to experience them. This is not regression. It is integration. You have completed a circle. You have arrived exactly where you always were. But now you are conscious. The journey was never about becoming someone else. It was about returning to who you already were before you learned to abandon yourself. High vibration is not an achievement. It is a homecoming, a return to your natural state, a state where you do not need to prove, impress, convince, perform, or explain. You simply exist. You feel. You choose. You move. From an inner place that is steady. You no longer chase meaning. You notice it. You no longer chase purpose. You live it. Quietly, ordinarily, honestly, and perhaps the most profound shift of all. You stop needing your life to look important. It only needs to feel true. You stop asking, how does this appear? You start asking, does this align? You stop wondering, am I enough? You start knowing, I am here, and being here fully is enough. Not because everything is perfect, not because pain disappears, not because uncertainty vanishes, but because you trust yourself to meet whatever comes. You trust your capacity. You trust your inner compass. You trust the quiet voice inside you more than the loud opinions outside you. You do not need a grand spiritual identity. You do not need a title. You do not need to be seen as awakened. You are simply awake to your own life. And that changes everything. You walk slower. You listen deeper. You react less. You choose more carefully. You forgive more quietly. You love more honestly. You let go more cleanly. Not in a dramatic way, in a real way. And real change is often invisible, but it is stable. It lasts. This is the kind of transformation that cannot be taken from you, because it is not built on circumstances. It is built on inner alignment. You did not become extraordinary. You became authentic, and authenticity is the most grounded, powerful, and unshakable frequency there is. You did not rise above life. You entered it, fully, consciously, willingly, and that is the quiet miracle. Before conditioning ever took hold of you, before anyone told you that you were too much or not enough, before you learned to hide, to soften, to perform, to shrink, to adapt, before you memorized which parts of yourself were acceptable and which parts were not. You were already whole. You were already complete. You were already enough. What you are slowly returning to is not something new. It is something ancient. Your essence was never loud. It was never flashy. It was never designed for spectacle. Your essence is quiet, simple, unimpressed by appearances, uninterested in proving itself. It does not crave recognition. It does not hunger for titles. It does not need to be validated in order to exist. It simply is. And maybe that is why this path feels unfamiliar in a world obsessed with performance. Maybe you recognize yourself in this. Maybe you feel that you did not accidentally become more solitary. You chose it, not out of bitterness, not because you hate people, not because you failed socially, but because something in you knew that your nervous system needed space. Your soul needed quiet. Your truth needed room to breathe. Maybe you sense that your silence holds a power you cannot fully explain. Not the power to dominate, not the power to save, not the power to be saved, but the power to remain intact, the power to stay aligned, the power to stay honest with yourself. And if you feel this, you already know. This is not about becoming special. It is about becoming real. It is not about being better than others. It is about being closer to yourself. High vibration is not a promise of an easy life. It does not guarantee comfort. It does not guarantee approval. It does not guarantee being understood. It does not guarantee being chosen. It guarantees something far more important. It guarantees that you will not abandon yourself again. It guarantees that you will not pretend to be who you are not in order to belong. It guarantees that you will no longer betray your inner knowing for external acceptance. It guarantees loyalty to your own soul. And that is a rare form of wealth. You do not need more signs. You do not need more confirmation. You do not need a spiritual teacher to tell you that you are on the right path. You do not need a healer to validate what you already feel in your body. You do not need friends to agree. You carry an inner compass, and that compass is not loud. It does not shout. It does not argue. It does not negotiate. It quietly pulls you toward what feels true, toward what feels clean, toward what feels aligned, even when that direction makes no sense to others, even when it leads you away from what once felt familiar, even when it leads you into silence. Trust that. Trust the quiet. Trust the subtle sensations in your body that say yes or no without explanation. Trust the moments when something inside you closes. Trust the moments when something inside you opens. These are not random. They are communication, not from the mind, from the deeper self, the integrated self, the part of you that exists beyond masks, beyond roles, beyond stories, beyond trauma identities, beyond spiritual labels. This self does not need to be impressive. It does not need to be admired. It does not need to be witnessed. It only needs to be lived. You may notice that you are less interested in explaining yourself, less interested in convincing, less interested in defending your choices. Not because you became cold, not because you stopped caring, but because you stopped needing agreement. You know why you do what you do. You know what you have survived. You know what you have outgrown. You know what you cannot return to, and that knowing is quiet. It does not seek applause. It does not seek permission. It simply exists. If something in this message resonated with you, it is not an accident, not because this text is special, not because these words are powerful, but because something inside you already knows this truth. These words are only mirrors. You are not broken. You are not defective. You are not behind. You are not cursed. You are not failing. You are evolving inward. You are shedding layers that no longer belong to you. You are becoming less performative and more present. You are becoming less explainable and more authentic. You are becoming less visible and more real. That path is rarely celebrated. It is rarely understood. It is rarely rewarded externally, but it is deeply right. You do not need to rush. You do not need to force. You do not need to become anything else. You are already becoming who you are. Slowly, quietly, honestly. If you wish to stay in this space, you are welcome. If you wish to walk this path further, you are not alone. Not in a crowded way, not in a loud way, but in the quiet recognition that there are others scattered across the world, walking inward instead of outward, choosing depth over display, choosing truth over performance, choosing themselves. and maybe that is enough. Welcome to your silence, welcome to your inner truth, welcome home.